It's dialing.
Go ahead, Taylor. Good evening and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with Doug Owens, your candidate to represent Utah's 4th District, and Congressman Jim Matheson, currently representing Utah's 4th District. My name is Taylor Morgan, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. We'll begin in just a moment. We're very excited to have you join us. Before we begin, a few quick points. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out to thousands of callers, so please just stay on the line, and we'll be hearing from Doug and Representative Matheson shortly. Also, we want to hear from you tonight. If you'd like to ask a question of Doug or Representative Matheson, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and you'll be connected automatically with one of our volunteer operators. Again, to ask a question tonight during the call, please press 0, and you'll be connected with a volunteer operator to ask your question. Again, welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with Doug Owens, your Democratic candidate to represent Utah's 4th District. My name is Taylor Morgan, and I will be your moderator for tonight's event. We're also very excited to have Congressman Jim Matheson, currently representing Utah's 4th Congressional District in Washington, D.C. My name is Taylor, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. We'll begin in just a few moments. We're very excited to have you join us. Before we start the call, please note that we're in the process of dialing out still, and so we'll begin in just a few minutes. During the call tonight, we really do want to hear from you. Both Doug Owens and Representative Matheson really want to answer your questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 at any time during the call tonight on your keypad, and you'll be directed with one of our volunteer operators to ask a question. If you've just joined us, good evening and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with Doug Owens, your candidate to represent Utah's 4th District, and Representative Jim Matheson. I'm Taylor Morgan, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. We're going to begin in just a moment, and most importantly, thank you for joining us. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out, so please just stay on the line for a moment, and we'll begin shortly. During the call tonight, we really do want to hear from you. Doug Owens and Representative Matheson would really like to answer your questions. To ask a question at any point during the call tonight, please press 0, and you'll be connected automatically with one of our volunteer operators to ask your question. We'll begin in just a moment. Okay, thank you everyone for joining our telephone town hall tonight with Doug Owens, your candidate for Utah's 4th Congressional District, and Representative Jim Matheson, currently representing Utah's 4th Congressional District. We're going to go ahead and begin the call right now. To begin, we'd like to welcome Utah Representative Jim Matheson on the line and have him begin by saying a few words. Representative Matheson, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, and thanks to folks for taking the time to be on this telephone town hall. This is just a great way for you to get to meet and get to know better Doug Owens, candidate for Congress, and I'm just thrilled to participate in this and encourage everyone to take the time to really get to know Doug. You know, I find in politics that a lot of people like to say, well, I vote the person and not the party. And to do that, you got to know the person. And I've known Doug for 30 years. And I know Doug Owens is the kind of guy who is thoughtful. He is smart. He tries to listen to lots of different points of view. And I believe he will put the interests of his constituents above politics or party. And he will be exactly the type of representative that we want to see in Washington today. I know how the public, I hear it every day. I know the public's not too happy about the way Congress is performing these days. I'm not too happy with the way it's performing in terms of the gridlock we see. And I've tried to be a voice of reason and conciliation and working on both sides of the aisle. And Doug would be the same kind of voice. And so, again, I encourage you to take the time to get to know Doug. Thank you for participating on this telephone town hall. It's a great way to hear from a lot of folks at once. And again, if you press 0, that gets you in the queue to ask a question. So please press 0 if you want to ask Doug a question. And I'm happy now to turn this over to Doug. And again, just wanted to say how much I feel strongly about the quality of an individual that Doug Owens is. And I encourage you to get to know Doug. I think you'll find he's the type of guy you'd like to see representing us in Congress.
Hi, this is Doug Owens. I want to thank Congressman Jim Matheson for being here with me tonight. Just by way of brief introduction, I'm a sixth-generation Utahn. I've been married for 25 years to my wife, Cynthia. We have 4 wonderful children, and I have been a business defense attorney for about 25 years as well. And I, about 20 years ago, took 2 years off to stay home with the 3 little boys we had then, all under the age of 5. So my wife could finish a residency in pediatrics. So that's by way of brief introduction. I think this is a very important election. I'm running to get Congress working again to find common sense solutions for the hardworking families here in Utah. And I will be an independent voice for Utah, put Utah first, and pass the test for me will be what is good for Utah families. So with that introduction, we're ready for your questions. So if you want to ask a question, please press 0 to be connected to a moderator, and you can ask your question. I appreciate all of you being here tonight. I will add that I have known Jim for 30 years ago. He's an old friend, and I had my first political job working for Jim, so who was then managing my dad's campaign for governor. Some of you may remember Wayne Owens. So we are old friends, and I appreciate him being here tonight. Happy to take your questions and learn what's on your mind and address those questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Again, a quick reminder that if you have a question for Doug Owens or for Representative Matheson, you can ask a question by pressing 0 at any time on your keypad to be connected with a volunteer operator. So with that, we'll go to our first question, which is from David in Murray. David asks Doug, how do you intend to deal with Social Security? David, would you like to go ahead and ask Doug that question directly?
Yes, thank you. So I think there's no question that Social Security actuarially needs to have some changes with people living longer and the larger baby boomers and so on. And I think it's also sometimes overblown. It's not going to take that many tweaks to the system, but it is going to take some, whether it's a change to the maximum income subject each year, or whether it's a small change to the percentage, or whether it's a reduction in benefits. There are a variety of options, and I guess I'm just interested in what you would recommend to fix the Social Security issue.
Thank you, David. That's a great and important question. You know, my hat is off to our seniors who left our country strong and free for the next generation. I believe those benefits are earned benefits, and I want to protect them. I do agree with you, David. There's not a drastic fix that's needed. I've got an opponent who wants to privatize Social Security. I don't think that's right to put that in the hands of Wall Street, given especially the history we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years. That's too dangerous. I believe that our seniors have earned those benefits and want to maintain them. I think that the fix I propose is a less drastic one, which is simply to incentivize seniors to work an extra year, to give them a tax break. I think actuarially that can take it Social Security long beyond the 25-year horizon it's currently on. So I think with that more modest fix, we can see how if we right the ship adequately with a more modest change, then we can move forward and see if further changes are needed. I do oppose drastic changes like those proposed by my opponent to privatize and increase the retirement age. I don't think those are necessary at all.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you for your question, David. Again, a reminder to those on the call that if you have a question for Doug Owens or for Representative Matheson, please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask your question. Again, to ask a question anytime, simply press 0. Now we'll move on to our next question, which is from Sterling in Murray. Sterling has a question for Doug about his commitment to following the Constitution. Sterling, would you like to go ahead and ask your question directly of Doug?
Yes. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, I think our biggest problem we've been having with our whole system lately is they've all gotten away from our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, how our forefathers wanted us to follow. And I feel if every government official was following the Constitution, we would not be in this situation right now. Do you agree or not?
Well, I can tell you, I certainly have read the Constitution myself many times. It's part of the scripture that I live by and believe in, and I want to make sure we adhere to it closely. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Doug, for that answer. We're going now to Dan in Harriman, who has an important question about really a key issue in this race, about education. This question is for Doug. Dan, would you like to go ahead and ask your question, please?
Hi, Doug.
Hi.
How would you fund education as opposed to your opponent? I don't know what her deal is, but it sounds like she wants just to do away with everything.
You know, I think we all ought to be able to agree that education is one of the most important investment we can make in our future. Education is how we're going to enable our children to have a greater opportunity. Education is how we're going to grow the economy. Education is how we're going to change the face of Utah and our country through research and investment. So I want to make sure that we have the most robust, best education system on the planet. Business demands that we do that in a global economy as well. So, my mother was a teacher. My great-grandfather was the first teacher in Panguitch, Utah. I want you to understand that I will defend the federal sources for Utah education. You know, almost 12% of our public education funding comes from national sources. We can't do away with that. That's the special education. That's Title I schools from less advantaged economic backgrounds. So I want to maintain that. I've got an opponent who has called for doing away with that. I can't imagine a less productive thing to do for Utah, where you got now we're lowest in per pupil expenditures. We got to address that issue rather than making it worse.
Thanks so much, Doug. To remind everyone on the call right now, if you have a question for Doug Owens or for Representative Jim Matheson, you can ask a question by pressing 0 on your keypad, and you'll be automatically connected with a volunteer operator to ask your question. Again, if you have a question, please press 0 to be connected so you can ask that question. With that, we will now move on to Ronald. Ronald in Sugar House has a question for Doug. Ronald, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I'd like to know, from your point of view, what are you absolutely adamant about and against Mia Love? What one thing that she stands for and is trying to do that you were totally against?
Well, I think this education issue is probably the single biggest difference that we've got. I just addressed that. I think it's the most important thing we can do. I think we go off the rails if we eliminate the Department of Education. I think we've got to figure out ways to improve our education system here and increase the education and per pupil expenditures. So I think that's probably the single biggest difference. I would leave it at that. That's probably the biggest difference.
And I just want to say, this is Congressman Matheson. I think that Doug understands where our education funding comes from. I'm not sure his opponent really understands how education is funded. Primarily, it's state and local funding anyway, but this increment that comes from the federal side is critical in terms of completing the educational needs we need in this state. And when it comes to special education funding and Title I funding, which is where the primary amount of federal money goes, that's critical to how our school system works in this state. It doesn't come with a lot of strings attached to the federal government's telling Utah how to educate the kids, what the curriculum should be. There's a lot of scare tactics talked about that. Doug's not for that. None of us in Utah are for the federal government telling us how to educate our kids. But I don't think Doug's opponent even understands where the funding comes from. And to say I want to eliminate the Department of Education outright at the federal level just doesn't show a basic understanding of how education works in this country, and it's not in Utah's children's interest to have that type of person in Congress.
Thank you so much, Representative Matheson. Again, for those on the call right now, if you have a question for Doug Owens or Representative Matheson, they'd love to take your questions. You can ask a question by pressing 0 at any time to be connected with a volunteer operator. We're going to go now to Sarah, who has a question about immigration reform. First, that question for Representative Matheson, and then for Doug Owens as well. Sarah, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
What have you done to stop illegals from entering this country? And there was gridlock and trying to reach across the aisle. If something's right and something's wrong, why do we need a gray area?
If that question's first addressed to me, this is Congressman Matheson, I'd offer the following. During my time in Congress, and of course I'm leaving, that's why Doug is running for this job now, and I hope he is my replacement, I have voted for a massive increase in funding for border security. It has resulted in a huge reduction in illegal border crossings during that time. And so I'm not saying the problem has been fully addressed, but it's important to note that a significant change in the number of illegal boarding crosses in this country has occurred, and that change is where a lot fewer are happening. I think it's a mistake to just think it's a border issue. Most people who are here without legal status actually entered this country legally. So whatever you do on the border, whatever fence you put there, or border security, most people are coming here on a legal visa, be it a travel visa, a student visa, a work visa, and then they stay after it expires. So there's a broader systemic issue we really need to be talking about. And I have to say, when it comes to immigration, this is one where there was a bipartisan agreement. And the United States Senate did vote in a bipartisan way just in this session of Congress to move ahead a significant immigration reform bill. And it had bipartisan support, including the support of Senator Hatch. Unfortunately, we see no progress on that issue because the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, will not allow that vote to happen. He won't even bring that bill up for a vote for the House of Representatives. And we all know in Washington we've had a lack of bipartisan effort and a lot of gridlock. Well, here was an issue where people actually came together. And I'm not saying the Senate bill's perfect, and I'm not saying there aren't amendments I might want to offer to make it better. But I will tell you that for the first time in my career in Congress, something happened in the bipartisan way in immigration in the Senate, and I think it's really unfortunate that the Speaker of the House decided we shouldn't even get to vote on it.
And I would add, this is now Doug Owens, I would add that I second the notion we've got to have a secure border. I want only a legal immigration process. You know, this dysfunction in Washington, Jim just highlighted, Congressman Matheson, is very significant. There was recently a report from General Kelly, the head of the U.S. Southern Command, saying that due to sequestration, which is a direct result from the dysfunction in Congress, that now 75% of drug interdictions are going of drug transactions across the border are going unchallenged by American customs and military forces. So we've got to get beyond this gridlock because it's really creating a security issue beyond just the immigration issue. There's also a drug issue. There's a budding Ebola virus issue. We ought to get control of our borders. I absolutely agree with the congressman on that.
Thank you so much, Doug and Representative Matheson. A reminder to everybody on the call right now, really important that we hear from you tonight. We'd love to take your questions. Doug and Representative Matheson would love to take your questions. To ask a question, please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with the volunteer operator to ask that question of either Doug Owens, Representative Matheson, or both. We will now go to Samuel in Taylorsville, who has a question for Doug Owens about ending dysfunction in Washington. Samuel, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, this is Samuel Sowards. This will kind of cover both Matheson and Owens. It seems like there's a lot of gridlock in Congress, and that we're a nation that's not as bipartisan as perhaps we used to be, and we're creating these lines that are creating disharmony and disunity in the congressional process. For example, when my father was in the Utah legislature for 18 years and Speaker of the House, he had great respect for Representative Matheson's father when he was governor of the state, and had great respect because former Governor Matheson could get things done. So I was wondering if that's kind of the same way that perhaps possible Representative Owens would be and try to reach those bipartisan lines and try to make Congress more workable. If that makes any sense.
Samuel. Thank you very much. That's a great question. I appreciate your comments and being reminded of that history with your father. You know, I'm reminded of my father, Wayno, as a guy who could work across party lines to get things done for Utah. You know, the Central Utah Water Project was completed primarily by him and Jake Garn, who was of the other party. And those two guys worked for 5 years very hard to get that legislation through Congress. And now when you turn on a tap in Salt Lake County or Utah County, 1/3 of that water is now coming from that project. So bipartisanship absolutely has yielded great benefits for Utah and can do again. We need to get back to that model. We've had that model forever. We're on the road now to have the least productive session of Congress in the history of the Republic. So we've got to be Americans first. We've got to reach across the aisle. We've got to reason together, even though we may see things differently. That's the Utah way, right? We can find common ground with people who differ from us as long as we sit down and reason together and realize we've got problems that got to be solved even though we just have different viewpoints. So that's absolutely my viewpoint. It was my father's viewpoint. To the extent you can inherit a viewpoint, I did. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. I've helped people get into details and figure out how to find common ground and work a compromise. So we've absolutely got to get back to that way of doing business.
Thanks for that answer, Doug. Reminder to the callers, if you have a question for Doug or for Representative Matheson, you can ask a question by pressing 0 at any time to be connected with an operator. Again, to ask a question at any time, please press 0. We will now go to Marilyn in Taylorsville, who has a question for Doug about how he differs with President Obama. Marilyn, go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Yes. I was just wondering if he could tell us, if Doug could tell us 3 areas perhaps of things that have been happening in the Obama administration that he does not agree with, and also discuss a little bit about the scandals. They've been calling them scandals in the last year or two, and which ones he thinks are not really scandals.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. You know, I think that the president has been a disappointment on a number of fronts, and the first thing is that I think the president ought to be the nonpartisan in chief. He's been very partisan in how he's approached business. He's not negotiated with the other party in the House of Representatives like I'd like to see him do. His rhetoric, I think, ought to be toned down. He ought to be the nonpartisan in chief and set the example for the rest of the country. I don't think we can get along with the president as partisan as this. The biggest difference I probably would cite is the Obamacare. You know, there's so many problems with that that need to be fixed, and yet we've had such polarized discussion now for the almost 2 years it's been in place, I should say, that we're not having any dialogue over fixing the problems with it. There's some real serious issues with that. I've talked to business owners, small business owners who've admitted, who've told me candidly they had to reduce every employee's hours a week so they didn't have to pay the penalty, or buy the insurance. We can't continue to saddle employers with the provision of insurance. It's economically terrible for those jobs that we got to have to hold on to good-paying jobs for families. You know, there's another piece in there that I don't like. There's many pieces, but one I would cite also is the medical device tax. That's really hitting Utah unusually hard. We've got a big medical device tax, 2.3%. Not only the president has been unwilling to talk about this, but Senator Reid, personally kept us out of some tax reform legislation this year that would have benefited Utah greatly. So I want to go back and get people to cooperate. That's my approach, and so that's one. Those are a couple of very serious areas of disagreement with the president. I forget the last part of Marilyn's question, actually. So I apologize, Marilyn. If you're still there, please fire away again. Well, I guess we better move on, Mr. Moderator.
Okay,
I apologize. I forgot that.
Let's go ahead and move on. For our callers, if you have a question for Doug Owens or for Representative Matheson, we'd love to hear from you. Please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask a question. We do have a question from Paul. Paul has a question for Doug. Doug, if you could address for Paul and the rest of our callers your position on the Second Amendment and gun control. Go ahead, Doug.
Sure. I support the Second Amendment. I've read the colonial history of that amendment. I support it. I grew up hunting and fishing. I don't hunt as much anymore, but I'm a gun owner myself. I have 8 firearms. I go skeet shooting with my kids. So I support the Second Amendment, absolutely.
Great. Thank you for that, Doug. We're going to go ahead and now take, we have a question coming in now from email. This is Joanna emailing from West Jordan. She has a question about specifically student loans and higher education. Doug, she wants to know what you will do to make higher education accessible and affordable for Utah families. Doug, go ahead and answer when you're ready.
Sure, Joanna, thank you. That's a very significant issue we're facing. You know, I think given the changes in our economy through technological innovation and globalization, that we've got to have the best education system on the planet. I think we all ought to agree that that's our path forward for our kids and for our economy. So I want to make sure we've got we improve access to higher education. That means maintaining federal student loans. You know, I went through law school, I should say, with the benefit of student loans. I could not have afforded law school but for the availability of student loans. So I want to make sure that remains available. Now, 80% of Utah students going through college with either student loans or some form of federal assistance. I want to make sure that stays in place. I've got an opponent who is diametrically opposed on this issue, wants to eliminate student loans and Pell Grants. I don't think we can I think that takes us off the rails from where we need to be headed. So I want to maintain that availability and do other things to improve accessibility to higher education. I'm not satisfied that often I meet people out on the trail who are saying to me they're afraid of taking on the debt to afford higher ed. So we not only need to keep the loans available, but we've got to make it more affordable. The cost has been inflating very seriously ahead of the cost of inflation. So we've got to figure out ways to make that more affordable. There's some things I've got in mind, like I would reduce the rate on student loans. You know, if we can lend money to banks at 0.5%, I think we can lend it to people trying to better themselves and their future. I think there's some other things about making college maybe a 3-year plan, focusing on more practical objectives for college, working on getting more kids into community colleges that seem to be able to educate them more efficiently than larger universities, more traditional universities, I should say. There's some other things to address costs. I want to make it easier to access higher ed, not harder.
And this is Congressman Matheson, and I just want to chime in because what you just heard are 2 really big differences between Doug Owens and his opponent for Congress. The first he mentioned, he is for having student loans and Pell Grants so that everyone has an opportunity to get a college education they want. His opponent, who took student loans herself, by the way, when she went to college, doesn't think anyone else should have them anymore. A completely opposite position, and one that I haven't met anyone who agrees with it, quite frankly. But the second key difference that Doug just pointed out in his answer is you just heard him offer thoughtful, constructive suggestions for how to deal with growing costs of higher education. This guy steps up and gives you concrete ideas. You may not agree with every one of them, but he's the type of congressman who's going to be straight with you about coming up with specific ideas. His opponent has avoided answering any question on any issue this entire campaign season. So keep that in mind as you evaluate these candidates going forward. I sure want a congressman who's thoughtful and coming up with ideas, try to solve problems and make progress. That's what we need in Congress today.
Thank you very much, Congressman. To remind the callers, we would love to have your questions for Doug Owens and for Representative Matheson. If you have a question, please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with an operator to get your question in the queue. Right now, we are going to go to Wade in West Jordan, who has a question for Doug. Wade, go ahead with your question.
Hello. I have a concern about Mialov's approach to the Obamacare. I prefer to call it Affordable Care Act because it is law now, and I would not have been able to get insurance without this affordable care. The COBRA option is really not affordable to anyone except highly paid executives. And I just want to know what Mia Love wants to repeal this Obamacare issue completely. And that's just not, that's a moot point right now because it's law. And I would like to know what you would do to try to help fine-tune the Affordable Care Act and be able to help the American people with insurance issues, because it's a major problem. You know, there are a huge number of people who are not able to get insurance, and that's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wade. That's a great question. You know, accessibility to healthcare is a very important issue, as you mentioned. We've got to go to work on a pragmatic basis to fix what's wrong with that act. My opponent has called for the repeal. There have been almost 50 votes to repeal it. It's not pragmatic to keep talking about that, and frankly, it polarizes the dialogue on actually fixing the pieces that we need to change with the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as many know it. So I want to get back there and be pragmatic, roll up my sleeves, and get to work on what we don't like. I mentioned earlier that I think it's very dangerous to continue saddling employers with the mandate to provide care. I think I want to fix that tax on medical devices. You know, my wife is a physician, I mentioned, and some politicians will not want to get into medical policy, but I think it's essential to do that. And my wife and I often talk about it over dinner because she encounters some of the mandates in that act that govern what doctors are doing. I don't like that. And, I think it's fine for the government to set goals, but not to mandate every step on the way. We want to have doctors and medical providers be free to innovate, create, and build the medical system in a way that benefits us all by using their talents. So I think we need to amend the act and get serious about it rather than simply discussing it in polarizing terms that alienate both sides. You know, we've got to get to work and fix the parts we don't like. And maybe Jim ought to address that. I'd like to hear Congressman Matheson talk about his reservations about that act and what we can do to amend it. I think that's important to get his view.
Well, I think Doug identified the issue that, look, access to health care is a goal that I think most all of us share. We think everyone in America needs to have access to quality, affordable health care. The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, made some progress on access, but it falls really short on a number of other aspects of reforming our healthcare system to make sure that there is quality and affordable care. And those are the components of the law that really need to be fixed. And whether it's this employer mandate that creates the 30, where everyone says, if I can just limit my employees to 30 hours, I don't have to provide insurance. So we're forcing people to work fewer hours and have lower income. Boy, that's not a good idea. And Doug's articulated that to you. We need to talk about issues that weren't included in the Affordable Care Act, about quality, about responsibility, about creating the right incentives in our healthcare system so costs don't continue to grow at a greater rate than inflation. That was happening before the Affordable Care Act became law. It's happening after the Affordable Care Act became law. So there's a fundamental issue in healthcare. We got to figure out this growth, excessive growth in costs, and we need thoughtful people to come to the table because this is a tough issue. This isn't an easy one. This isn't one you solve with a soundbite. And to break it into a simplistic two-dimensional debate between Democrats and Republicans only offering 2 points of view, boy, we're not going to get there on that. We need elected officials to roll up their sleeves and work together to come up with a whole basket of ideas to really secure the future of our healthcare system.
Thank you so much, Representatives Matheson and Doug, for that answer. We are going to now go to our next question. Before we do that, a reminder to the callers, if you have a question for Doug or Representative Matheson, you can ask the question by pressing 0 on your keypad, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask your question. And now we'll go to Jana in West Valley City, who has a question about how Doug will end gridlock. Jana, go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Hi, yes. I really appreciate that you're willing to work across the board and work with other parties. My discouragement is it seems like they're all peacocking back there and not willing to work together. And you talked about the Speaker of the House and making things hard on immigration and that bill that was passed or wants to be. I just wonder, how are you going to do it? How are you going to encourage a unity when it feels like there's such separation and such pride going on?
Thank you, Jana. You raise a very good issue, and first of all, you got to look at your choices here. I have told you my honest outlook, and I've always felt this way, that party needs to be a very, very distant consideration to the national interest, what's in the people's interest, what's in the interest of Utah families. And, my father approached it that way. He belonged to a different era, and I've watched, I know that history. I know that Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan in 1986 agreed to some great tax reform that benefited every American, and we can get back to that model. If those two guys could agree on that, we can do it again, and it's a two-way street. There's no blaming one party here. It's a two-way street, and who better to find common ground than a Democrat from Utah, frankly? I would have to, I need to do that, and in order to do my job. And I'll tell you, specifically, I've got one specific idea besides taking my own personality and trying to make friends across the aisle. The other one is that, we could maybe go to work on smaller pieces of legislation rather than tackling, say, comprehensive immigration reform. Maybe we break it up in pieces and have confidence-building measures, in essence, like you would with two countries that have been at war, so that they can see that they can cooperate on maybe some smaller steps and not have to be at each other's throats with those smaller steps. So I think that's one pragmatic suggestion. But monitoring your own speech and not dumping on people just on a partisan basis, making friends across the aisle, I think that personality is a great difference. I've got an opponent, frankly, who I think has manifested a national party outlook. Raised over 90% of her money out of state, and has earned tens of thousands of dollars in speaking fees out of state. I think you got to ask yourself, who's going to be putting Utah families first, and who's going to be putting a national party agenda first. We can't survive with these national party agendas. We got to get pragmatic, and I think Utah is the best place, as good as any place, to send that value back to Washington. And I'll take that value. I'm going to be an independent voice for Utah and get beyond this partisanship.
Thanks so much, Doug. Reminder for our callers, if you have a question, please press 0, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask your question. Our next question for Doug comes from Mark in Salt Lake City. Mark has a question about foreign policy. Mark, go ahead with your question for Doug when you're ready.
Yes, hello, Doug. I apologize. My question to you is, how do you feel about what's going on in the Middle East right now between the Palestinians and the Israelis? It seems like a very complicated situation, and I just want to know what you feel about it, or if there's any particular solutions, even though there's been a lot of negotiation that's been going on over there. So I just want to know how you feel about it.
Well, I would love to see, of course, Israel be able to be at peace with her neighbors. And that war this last summer, that short war, I think has created some opportunity to further the peace process there. The extremist Hamas government in Gaza, I think there's an opportunity with possibly some humanitarian aid going into Gaza that could be monitored to make sure it doesn't get hijacked into, military type usage and is used for housing and other kinds of humanitarian relief. That if there's a strong enough supervision of that spending, there could be a change. That could help promote a change in the government in Gaza that would be more interested in making peace with Israel. That's probably all that I would say. I think maybe Congressman Matheson may want to address this issue.
Well, I have to say, and the questioner phrased it right. He said, look, this is a complicated issue. Let's not kid ourselves. It's been around for a long time. But I would suggest one other lens through which to look at this situation, and that is the broader Middle East and the other countries in the Middle East. I think that they've, in some ways, hidden behind the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and not really addressed the broader issues going on in the Middle East right now. And it's a complicated neighborhood. The best friend the United States has in that neighborhood is Israel, in my personal opinion. It's important that the United States support Israel. But I also think we need to get the other Arab countries to engage on a broad range of issues, not just the Palestinian issue. We've got a situation where Iran is developing nuclear weapons. That is a serious threat to global stability. We got a situation where ISIL is running rampant through vast sections of Syria and Iraq. This is a complicated world, and we should look at it in that broader context. And I think we need those other Arab countries to engage in those issues to try to resolve them. The United States is always going to be at the table pushing negotiation, but we need partners in that part of the world to step up the plate as well, and not just use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as an excuse not to deal with a number of these other critical issues in that part of the world.
Thanks very much, Doug and Representative Matheson, for your answers. For the callers, if you have a question for Doug or Rep. Matheson, please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask a question. Again, if you have a question, we really do want to hear from you. Please press 0 to ask your question. We are now going to go to Gary in South Jordan, who has a question for Doug. Gary, go right ahead.
Hello, Doug and Representative Matheson. It's a pleasure to speak with you tonight. I am wondering. Hi. I am wondring. Your opponent has the majority of her campaign funds coming from outside the state of Utah. Yet she claims that she's going to represent Utah interests. I am wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea in some of your political ad campaign, in your political ads, to point that out, something along the lines of "Don't let foreign money buy your vote." Whereas,
Gary, I agree that indicates somebody's outlook. I think where they're getting their money, almost all my money, well over 95% is in state. I think people sense that I'm going to be the person who puts Utah first. I think that money from out of state does indicate where that support for my opponent is coming from. It's not a Utah first campaign that's spending all that money here. Absolutely. And I'll consider putting it on a commercial. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks for that question, Gary. Thanks for answering, Doug. Reminder again for our callers, if you have a question for Doug Owens or Representative Jim Matheson, you can ask a question by pressing 0 at any time. We will now go to our next question, which is from Kathy in Salt Lake, who has a question for Doug about his experience that will allow him to be effective in Congress. Kathy, go ahead with your question.
Hi. Thank you for taking my question. Mr. Owens, I'm just wondering if you have had any government experience yourself that would demonstrate that you know how to work with the opposition to get legislation passed. Have you had any experience outside of the legal profession?
Thank you for that question. You know, I helped on my father's campaigns. I worked closely with him. I understood what he was doing and followed it closely. But I have not held any office. I've been in the private sector my whole life. I do think that 25 years as a business defense lawyer has helped me to understand why people disagree, when people disagree, how you can help them get together by getting into the details of their problems, being civil in your discourse, seeing things from the other person's perspective. So I have picked up those values. I hope people understand that about me. I think that private sector experience, frankly, is very valuable in government. So I've not held elective office previously myself.
Thanks, Kathy, for your question. Doug, thank you for your answer. We will now go to Wendy in South Jordan. Wendy has a question for Doug about how he will vote when he's in Congress. Wendy, go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Hi. I come from a position where I feel like both on the federal level as well as the state level, there have been a lot of things that people come together from both sides of the aisle and feel a certain way about an issue, and yet the people that are representing us sort of railroad us into the opposite thing. And I'm just curious if that's something, would you feel like you should vote to represent what people are telling you they want, or would you feel like you have to vote your conscience, or I'm just curious how you would make a decision like that.
Thank you for that question. I hope that what I'm communicating in this campaign is that I'm going to be an independent voice for Utah and putting Utah families first. I think, if people get comfortable with that understanding of me, you can have a disagreement now and then, but hopefully you've got some trust that your representative has good judgment, and where you may not, you may differ occasionally on an issue from time to time, you have the fundamental confidence that they're going to take your values to Washington, and that they're going to look fairly and thoughtfully at the issues and come back and communicate forthrightly with you. There may be times we disagree. I hope there's not many, but I hope people gain the confidence that I'm going to be trustworthy, that I'm going to be careful, that I'm going to communicate honestly and openly. Frankly, there's a big difference between my opponent and myself on this kind of thing. There's been a lot of questions put to her about stances on education that she's not clarified. She's passed up opportunities to clarify those positions and make her opinions known, to debate openly so that people can understand those positions. I want people to have the confidence that I'll always be a straight shooter and be open and honest about where I'm at and how I got there. And that's my philosophy of how our representative government should work.
Okay, thank you very much for that question, and Doug, thanks for your answer. We'd like to thank everyone who was on the call tonight. We're very grateful for all those who participated and asked questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to every question, but we do need to wrap up our call tonight. If you have a question that we haven't answered or that Doug and Representative Matheson didn't have a chance to answer, when the call does conclude, you'll be able to leave a voicemail with that question. We'd also encourage you to visit Doug's website, www.votedugowens.com, to learn more about Doug, his positions, and to ask any questions that you may still have for Doug. We'd also like to encourage everyone to take the opportunity to vote. You can vote early up to through Friday at an early voting location. You can find your location by visiting vote.utah.gov. And, of course, Election Day is next Tuesday. We'd encourage everyone to vote. We'd like now to give Representative Matheson a minute to wrap up with any closing remarks, and then we'll go to Doug for his closing remarks. So, Representative Matheson.
Well, thank you, Taylor, and thanks to folks for taking the time to be on the call. I know there's a lot going on in your lives, and to take time to listen in on a phone call is really important that you're willing to do that. I often say elections matter, and the people who we elect make decisions that affect our lives. For good or for bad, they affect our lives. And this is an election where I think you've got a pretty significant choice, a pretty significant difference between the two candidates running for Congress in the 4th District. I've run for office and have been elected 7 times in Utah to Congress. It's been a true honor and privilege. And I think that I was successful in being elected and representing Utah because I always tried to do the right thing for people back home. I think that voters tried to do what was best for Utah. And this year, what's best for Utah is to vote for Doug Owens. I think that you've heard it tonight. You've heard he's a thoughtful, pragmatic guy who wants to do the right thing. That's what we need more of in Washington, and he represents that approach. And I just encourage everyone to continue to get to know Doug, and I encourage you all to support him in the election this year. And with that, I will turn over the final comments to Doug.
Thank you, Congressman Matheson, for being here. Thank you to all of you folks who are listening and getting up to speed on this election. It's tremendously important, I think, and I appreciate your time and attention. I hope you'll take away from this that I'm going to be a strong and independent voice for Utah families in particular. I think we need somebody who's going to put partisanship aside and work and demand the best that both parties have to offer. It's been a privilege to run for office. It's been a privilege to meet so many fine Utahns and hear about their aspirations and hopes for our state and country. I want to thank my family in particular. They've been tremendous support to me. And I ask you for your vote. I think this is a very significant election, and I appreciate your attention and hope you'll vote for me. Thank you very much.